He saw a beat-up pickup truck doing 2 miles under the limit. He saw a black man in a plain gray T-shirt. He saw a target. What Officer Brian Caulfield did not see was the laminated credential tucked in the console, or the fact that he had just committed a federal offense in front of a dash cam linked directly to a government server. He thought he was running a routine stop. He was lighting the fuse on the worst decision of his life. The sun was already punishing by 8 in the morning on Route 9 outside Faro County, Georgia. It was the kind of flat, open stretch of highway where the heat rose off the asphalt in wavy sheets, and the only shade came from the occasional billboard advertising a personal injury lawyer or a bankruptcy attorney. The road ran straight for 11 miles between the interstate exit and the town of Caldwell Creek, and on a Tuesday morning in late June, it was almost entirely empty. Almost. Marcus Webb drove the way he always drove, both hands on the wheel, speedometer at exactly the limit, left blinker on early for every lane change even when there was no one around to signal to. At 41, Marcus had the kind of unhurried composure that other people sometimes mistook for arrogance. He wasn't arrogant, he was careful. He had spent 16 years learning to be careful in environments where carelessness got people killed, and those habits didn't disappear just because he was driving to a hardware store on a Tuesday morning. The truck was a 2009 Ford F-150, silver, with a small dent in the rear quarter panel from a parking lot in Savannah 2 summers ago. It was not a luxury vehicle. It was not flashy. The only thing on the back window was a small, faded oval decal, a state map outlined with a single word beneath it, Georgia. On the dashboard, plugged into the USB port, was an older model cell phone mounted in a bracket, its screen showing a navigation app even though Marcus had driven this route so many times he could do it in his sleep. He was heading to Caldwell Creek Hardware to pick up 2 bags of concrete mix and a box of timber screws. He was building raised garden beds for his mother, who had been asking him to do it since March. He had the weekend free for the first time in a while. Marcus noticed the cruiser the moment it pulled out from the shoulder behind the billboard for Hargrove Law Firm. He noticed it the way a man notices a crack in the ceiling, not with alarm, but with the automatic attention of someone who has learned to track things. He checked his speed, 43 and a 45. He checked his mirrors, both functioning. He checked his registration sticker, current. The lights came on anyway. Marcus put on his blinker and guided the truck smoothly onto the gravel shoulder. He lowered all 4 windows before the cruiser had even finished pulling in behind him, so that Officer Brian Caulfield, had he been paying attention, would have been able to see clearly that the driver's hands were on the steering wheel and that there was nothing threatening in the cab. Caulfield was not paying attention to any of that. He was 34 years old, 8 years on the Faro County Sheriff's Department, and he was the kind of officer whose personnel file was a study in near misses. 3 complaints in 2 years, all from the same general category. A young black man, a stop without clear cause, a report that didn't quite match what witnesses described. The complaints had been reviewed. The complaints had been filed. Nothing had been done. He had learned the lesson that nothing would be done. Caulfield stepped out of the cruiser. He put on his sunglasses. He walked to the driver's side of the truck with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his chin up, already broadcasting that this stop was not a conversation between equals. License and registration. He didn't say good morning. He didn't introduce himself. He just leaned against the door frame and waited. Good morning, officer. Marcus's voice was level, unhurried. My license is in my back pocket and the registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. Slowly, Marcus reached. He produced both documents and extended them through the window without making any sudden movements, holding them in 2 fingers the way you hold something you want a person to take without incident. Caulfield took them, looked at them for a moment, and then looked at Marcus. Not at the documents, at Marcus. Where are you coming from? My house, about 6 miles back on 9. Where are you headed? Hardware store in town. Caulfield's eyes swept the cab. He was looking for something. There was nothing to find. The truck was clean, a water bottle in the center console, a folded paper grocery bag on the passenger seat, the phone in its mount, and a small first aid kit wedged between the seat and the door. That first aid kit was military issue, the kind the VA hands out at transition assistance workshops. It had a small black and white patch on the front. Caulfield either didn't notice it or didn't care. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus went still. May I ask why, officer? I want to ask you some questions and I'd prefer to do it outside. I'm happy to answer questions from here. Caulfield's jaw tightened. He was a man who did not enjoy being responded to. In his experience, the experience he had carefully cultivated over 8 years, people got out when he told them to get out. That was the arrangement. He issued the instruction and they complied. I'm not going to ask twice. Marcus looked at the officer for a moment. He was measuring something, not anger, not fear. He was calculating the trajectory of the next 10 minutes the way he had spent 16 years calculating the trajectories of much more dangerous situations. "Officer," Marcus said, "I've given you my license and registration. I've done nothing that warrants an exit from the vehicle. I'm going to ask you to clarify the grounds for your request. Get out of the truck." Caulfield's hand dropped to his belt. "Sir, I'm asking for a reason." "I don't owe you a reason. Get out." Caulfield reached for the door handle. Marcus placed his hand on the interior release, not in defiance, but in the instinctive gesture of a man who had read the situation correctly and was trying to manage his own exit rather than be dragged out. It was a small movement. It was a composed, careful, deliberate movement. What followed was none of those things. Caulfield took 3 steps back and drew his taser. "Hands where I can see them. Now, get out of the vehicle, now," he was shouting. His voice had climbed an octave and lost whatever thin professional veneer it had arrived with. 2 cars on Route 9 slowed almost to a stop, their drivers watching. Marcus raised both hands, palms flat, fingers spread. "I am complying," he said clearly, slowly. "I am not a threat. I am complying." He reached for the door handle again, slowly, deliberately, hands visible. Caulfield pulled the trigger anyway. The twin prongs of the taser hit Marcus in the left shoulder and the side of his neck. 50,000 volts. 5 seconds. Marcus Webb, a man who had controlled aircraft, commanded teams in 4 countries, and been decorated for valor under conditions that would have broken most people, fell sideways across the bench seat, muscles locked, unable to move, unable to speak. He hit the steering wheel on the way down. His head struck the side window. When the current stopped, he was on the seat with his cheek against the vinyl, staring at the bottom of the dashboard. Caulfield holstered the taser, opened the door, and pulled Marcus out by his arm. "Stop resisting." Marcus was not resisting. Marcus could barely feel his left side. Caulfield put a knee in his back and cuffed him on the hot asphalt shoulder of Route 9, 7 miles from the hardware store where the concrete mix was waiting, while 2 cars idled on the roadway and their drivers stared through their windows. But one of those drivers had already picked up their phone. And what Caulfield did not know, what he had no way of knowing, because he had not looked at the documents he was holding closely enough, and because the only thing he had seen when he looked at Marcus Webb was the surface of the man, was that he had just tased a Federal Aviation Administration Special Operations liaison, a veteran of 16 years of service across 3 branches, and the personal attaché to a sitting member of the National Security Council. The cell phone in the dashboard mount had been recording the entire stop through its forward-facing camera, automatically uploading to a government-secured cloud server, since the moment Marcus put on his blinker and pulled over. The recording was already 3 minutes old. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., a notification had just appeared on a secure device. Faro County Sheriff's Department was not a large building. It was a converted municipal office on the edge of Caldwell Creek's downtown, beige brick with a parking lot that held maybe 12 vehicles, and a holding area in the back that smelled permanently of burned coffee and industrial cleaner. Deputy Sandra Greer was at the front desk when Caulfield brought Marcus Webb in through the side entrance. Greer was 26, 2 years on the job, and she had never quite gotten comfortable with the way Caulfield processed his arrests. She looked at Marcus. His left shoulder had the beginning of bruising where the probes had hit. There was a small cut above his ear from the window. He was walking under his own power, composed, silent, and looking at nothing in particular, the look of a man saving every observation for later. "What are the charges?" Greer asked. "Resisting, failure to comply, obstruction." Caulfield dropped Marcus's documents on the desk without looking at her. "Book him." Greer picked up the license. She turned it over. It was a standard Georgia license, current, no violations flagged when she ran the name. She ran the registration. The truck came back clean, registered to a Marcus D. Webb, current address in Faro County. She looked at the second item in the stack that Caulfield had dropped on her desk. It wasn't a document she'd seen in this context before. It was a government-issued credential card, blue and gold, with an eagle emblem and a series of classification markers she didn't entirely understand. "Caulfield," she said quietly, "what's this?" He glanced at it. "He had it in his console. It's probably fake." Greer read it again. She read the issuing agency. She read the clearance tier. She set it down very carefully and went to her computer. What she found when she ran the credential number did not match any of the explanations Caulfield had offered. What she found was a record that required 2 separate database queries and produced on the second attempt a message she had never seen before. "Contact duty officer before proceeding." She looked at Caulfield. He was filling out his incident report. "Brian," she said, "I think you need to stop writing that report." He didn't look up. "I'm good. I'm serious. You need to stop." He looked up then, irritated. "What is your problem?" My problem, Sandra Greer said, keeping her voice very low, is that I just ran this credential and the system told me to contact a duty officer. Do you know what agency uses that clearance tier? I don't care what agency. It's the same tier as the White House Communications Agency. The sound of Caulfield's pen against the paper stopped. In the holding area, Marcus Webb sat in a plastic chair with his wrists cuffed to a D-ring on the wall, and he was not doing what most people did in that situation. He was not panicking. He was not arguing. He was not trying to explain himself to anyone. He was sitting with his back straight and his eyes open, and he was waiting, with the absolute patience of a man who had spent 16 years waiting in places considerably less comfortable than a county sheriff's holding room, and who knew, with complete settled certainty, exactly what was coming next. He had made his one phone call 40 minutes ago, not to a lawyer, to a number that most people in the building didn't have and couldn't get. The first call came into Faro County Sheriff's Department at 11:22 in the morning. The clerk who answered it later described the voice on the other end as completely calm in a way that was somehow worse than yelling. The caller identified herself as Deputy Chief Counsel Adrian Park, Office of the White House Counsel. She asked to speak with the watch commander. Watch Commander Lieutenant Harold Foss had been with the department for 19 years. He had handled a hostage situation. He had handled 2 officer-involved shootings. He had handled a tornado evacuation in 2018 that required him to coordinate 6 separate agencies. Nothing had prepared him for what happened next. Deputy Chief Counsel Park spoke for approximately 4 minutes. Lieutenant Foss's pen did not move during any of those 4 minutes because he was not taking notes. He was gripping the edge of the desk. When she finished, she asked him to confirm that he understood the situation. He confirmed. She told him that someone would be arriving within 90 minutes and that Mr. Webb was not to be moved, processed further, or questioned before that arrival. She also told him in the same calm voice that the incident had been recorded in its entirety from 3 separate sources and that any alteration of records would constitute a federal offense. Foss said, "Yes, ma'am." Park said, "Thank you, Lieutenant," and ended the call. Foss sat at his desk for a long moment. Then he walked to Caulfield's workstation. "Brian," he said, "put down the report." Caulfield looked up. "I'm almost done." "I know, put it down and go wait in my office." What's going on?" Foss looked at him with the expression of a man who has just been handed a problem he didn't create and cannot easily solve. "Because," he said, "the White House just called about your arrest." The second call came 12 minutes later, and this one was not from a lawyer. The duty officer who took it at the front desk passed it to Foss with a look on her face like she had accidentally picked up a live wire. The caller was a Colonel James Ockafer, United States Army, assigned to the National Security Council's Interagency Liaison Office. He spoke briefly. He did not ask for an explanation. He stated that Senior Advisor Marcus Webb was a federal employee working under a protected assignment, that he had been unlawfully detained and subjected to use of force without cause, and that the colonel would be arriving in person within the hour. He asked Foss to confirm that Mr. Webb was physically unharmed. Foss confirmed to the best of his ability. The colonel said, "Thank you, Lieutenant," and that was that. Foss went back to his office. Caulfield was sitting in the chair across from his desk. He was still holding his pen. "You want to tell me again?" Foss said. "What exactly happened on Route 9 this morning?" Caulfield started with the same framing he always used: suspicious behavior, failure to comply, fear for officer safety. The taser was a proportionate response to, he had his hands raised, Foss said. He was moving toward the door in a threatening. 2 witnesses on Route 9, Brian. 2 civilian vehicles stopped. Both drivers are already talking to the county reporter. Foss put both hands flat on the desk, and his dashcam uploaded everything. The room went very quiet. "What do you mean, uploaded?" "I mean," Foss said carefully, "that the man you tased on the side of Route 9 had a government-issued recording device in his truck that was automatically sending footage to a federal server in real time. So whatever you thought happened out there, there is a copy of what actually happened sitting on a server that you and I do not have any access to and that you cannot touch." Caulfield's face went a specific shade of gray that Foss had only seen on people who had just fully understood the extent of a catastrophic error. "It was a legitimate stop," Caulfield said, but the confidence had left his voice entirely. Foss looked at him for a long moment. "Go home, Brian. You're on administrative leave pending review. Turn in your weapon and your badge before you walk out the door." The black SUV arrived at Faro County Sheriff's Department at 12:47. It was followed by a second vehicle, a dark blue government sedan, and behind that, a third, this one with U.S. government plates and a small American flag mounted above the front bumper. Colonel James Ockafer stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was 53 years old, lean, silver at the temples, and wearing a suit rather than a uniform, a deliberate choice. Because a uniform would have communicated rank, and what Colonel Acaffer had brought with him was something considerably more consequential than rank. With him were two agents from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, an attorney from the White House Counsel's office, and a woman Marcus Webb had served under a decade ago, whose current title was Deputy National Security Advisor and whose presence in Faro County, Georgia, on a Tuesday afternoon would be reported by 3 national outlets by the end of the day. Her name was Dr. Constance Hayward. She had been confirmed by the Senate. She had briefed the president. She had been at a committee hearing in Washington when the alert appeared on her phone. She had left the hearing. She had gotten in the car, because Marcus Webb had not just been a soldier she respected. Marcus Webb had spent 14 months as her lead analyst on a classified counterterrorism task force, had saved the lives of 2 of her team members in circumstances that were still classified, and had specifically requested a quieter posting in Faro County after his medical separation from active duty so that he could take care of his mother. She was not calm. She was doing what Marcus had always done, containing it, disciplining it, directing it. Lieutenant Foss met them in the parking lot. He was a practical man, and he had been doing a lot of thinking in the past 90 minutes. He shook Colonel Acaffer's hand. He shook Dr. Hayward's hand. He said, "I want you to know that Officer Caulfield has been placed on administrative leave and his weapons and badge have been secured. I have not altered any documentation. I want to cooperate fully with whatever your office requires." Dr. Hayward looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "Where is Mr. Webb?" Foss led them inside. When Marcus saw Dr. Hayward walk through the door, he closed his eyes briefly, a single involuntary expression of relief that was the most emotion he had shown in 3 hours. The attending deputy released the cuffs from the D-ring without being asked. Marcus stood. He rubbed his left wrist. He looked at Dr. Hayward. "Dr. Hayward," he said, "I'm sorry to pull you out of chambers." "Don't," she said. She took one look at the bruising on his shoulder. Her jaw set. She turned to Colonel Acaffer. "James." "I see it," the colonel said. The DOJ attorney was already photographing the injuries. Dr. Hayward turned to Foss. "I need a private room, and I need to speak to your department's legal counsel within the hour, and I need the full incident report, every version, including the one that was started and the one that was discontinued." "Yes, ma'am." "I also need to know everything you know about Officer Brian Caulfield's prior complaint history." Foss paused. "There are 3 complaints on file. We'll need all 3. They were reviewed and—" "I know," Dr. Hayward said. "We'll need them anyway." Brian Caulfield was at home when his phone rang for the first time. He didn't answer. He was sitting at his kitchen table with his service weapon locked in the safe in the bedroom and his badge in an evidence bag on the counter and a beer he had poured and not touched sweating in his hand. He had been a cop for 8 years. He had made 10 times this kind of stop. He knew the formula: put in the report, let the union handle it, wait for the complaint to work its way through the system and get buried. He had seen it happen. He had relied on it happening. But there was something different about the way Lieutenant Foss had looked at him when he said White House. Foss was not a man who scared easily, and what Caulfield had seen in that office was not irritation or even concern. It was the look of a man who has realized that the rules of a game have changed, and that they changed before he was informed. Caulfield's phone rang again, different number. He looked at it for a long time. He did not answer. He turned on the news instead. The stop had been uploaded online by one of the motorists who had witnessed it. The clip was 47 seconds long. It showed the truck on the shoulder, both windows clearly visible, both of Marcus's hands clearly raised, palms open. It showed Caulfield taking 3 steps back. It showed him raising the taser. It showed what happened next. The video had been up for 4 hours and had been viewed 6 million times. The hashtag above it read, "Who is the man?" Because in the clip, and in the dozens of news segments already beginning to pick it up, no one knew yet exactly who Marcus Webb was. The government credential had not been made public. The White House had not yet issued a statement. What viewers saw was a man with his hands raised being tased on the side of a highway, and what they were asking, with the particular relentless momentum of an internet that had seen this story before, was, who did this cop just put on the ground? Caulfield's phone continued to ring. He put it face down on the table. The statement came from the White House press secretary at 4:17 in the afternoon. It was 6 sentences long. It confirmed that Marcus David Webb was a federal employee serving in a protected advisory capacity. It confirmed that the incident had been recorded by government equipment and that the recording was in the custody of the Department of Justice. It confirmed that the Deputy National Security Advisor had traveled to Faro County personally. It stated that the president had been briefed. And it concluded, in the particular precise language that only appears in official statements when someone has been very careful about what words to use, that the administration expected the full weight of the law to be applied to those responsible, without exception and without delay. By 4:30, there were news vans on Route 9, filming the exact stretch of gravel where the stop had taken place, measuring the distance from the shoulder to the guardrail, interviewing the two motorists whose names were now in every newspaper. By 5 o'clock, Caulfield's attorney, a local defense lawyer named Ted Rubin who had handled 2 prior excessive force cases for the department and gotten them settled quietly, called Caulfield back and told him directly, "This is not a case I can manage. The DOJ is already involved. You need a federal criminal defense attorney, and you need one tonight." Caulfield said, "Can the union?" "The union is not picking up your phone calls," Rubin said. "I spoke to their office an hour ago. They are monitoring the situation." That means they're watching to see if they can separate themselves from you before the federal filing. The call lasted 4 more minutes. When it ended, Caulfield sat very still in his kitchen for a long time. There was a second twist buried in the White House statement that the press didn't fully understand until a national defense correspondent ran a follow-up piece at 7 that evening. Marcus Webb's advisory role, the reason for the government credential in his console, was tied to a classified program involving interagency protocol for domestic security coordination. The program had been active for 3 years. In the months before his medical separation from active duty, Marcus had received a commendation that was still classified. But what could be confirmed, and what the correspondent confirmed, was that Marcus had been working in the same building as the National Security Council staff when a specific incident occurred. An incident in which his quick assessment had prevented a serious breach in interagency communication that, according to 2 unnamed senior officials, could have had significant consequences. In other words, the man Brian Caulfield had tased on Route 9 for driving 2 miles under the speed limit in a 9-year-old pickup truck was not just a veteran. He was a man who had helped protect the people who protect the country, and the people those people reported to were now standing in Faro County. The formal investigation was opened by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division within 72 hours of the stop. The lead investigator was Special Agent Diana Morales, a 15-year veteran of federal civil rights work who had investigated 31 cases of this category and had a conviction rate that her colleagues described quietly as nearly perfect. Morales did not begin with Caulfield. She began with the 3 prior complaints. The first was from 2021. A 23-year-old black man named Deshaun Holloway had been pulled over on the same stretch of Route 9 for an alleged broken tail light. The tail light was not broken. A photograph taken by Holloway's passenger immediately after the stop showed both lights functioning. Holloway had been issued a citation anyway. He had complained. The complaint had been reviewed by then Sergeant Harold Foss and closed with a finding of insufficient evidence of misconduct. The second was from 2022. A 40-year-old woman named Gloria Tate had been stopped while returning from her shift at the Regional Medical Center, driving a newer model vehicle. Caulfield had alleged a lane violation. No ticket was issued, but Tate had filed a complaint reporting that Caulfield had asked her 3 times where she was going and had searched her vehicle without consent. The complaint had been reviewed, closed, filed. The third was from 2023. The complainant had declined to be named, but the description in the file matched every element of the other 2. Black, alone, mid-morning, the same corridor of Route 9. Morales put the 3 files side by side. She looked at the dates, the location codes, the demographics. She called the Faro County DA's office. "I need to know," she said, "whether there is a pattern here or an anomaly." She paused. "I already know the answer. I'm asking as a professional courtesy before we proceed." The DA, a man named Clark Webb, no relation to Marcus, a coincidence that the press would nonetheless find impossible to resist, called her back inside an hour. He was cooperative. He was, in fact, eager to be cooperative in the specific way that elected officials become eager when a federal agency has already established a beachhead in their jurisdiction, and the question is not whether accountability is coming, but how much of it will land on them. "I want to be transparent," Clark Webb said. "I appreciate that," Morales said. "Let's start with the complaint review process." The preliminary federal charging document was filed 14 days after the stop. Brian Caulfield was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal felony under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 242. The filing cited the video evidence, the prior complaint pattern, the government credential that established the federal nexus, and the testimony of Sandra Greer, who had provided a voluntary statement to investigators the day after the stop describing exactly what she had seen when Caulfield filed his initial report. The filing also named a second respondent. It named the Faro County Sheriff's Department as an institution, citing a documented failure to address a pattern of civil rights violations despite 3 formal complaints over 3 years, a finding that triggered a separate consent decree negotiation between the county and the DOJ Civil Rights Division. When the charging document became public, the union issued a statement. The statement was 2 sentences long. It confirmed that the union was not providing legal representation to Officer Caulfield and that his conduct, as documented, was inconsistent with the standards the union expects of its members. The statement did not mention the 3 prior complaints that the union had quietly helped close. Caulfield's attorney filed a response. Response argued, among other things, that the stop had been lawful, that the use of the taser was a proportionate response to perceived non-compliance, and that the federal nexus was being artificially created through the government credential in a manner that exceeded the original scope of the statute. Special Agent Morales read the filing. She forwarded it to the U.S. Attorney's Office with a single note. Page 4, paragraph 2. He admits he didn't know about the credential when he initiated the stop. That's their entire defense, and it's our best evidence. The federal trial opened on a gray October morning in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. The courtroom was full. The media section, cordoned off behind a low railing, held representatives from every major national outlet. Outside the courthouse, on the public plaza, there was a quiet, orderly assembly of people who had driven from several states to be there. Among them Deshaun Holloway, who had never had a broken taillight, and Gloria Tate, who had driven from her hospital shift to sit in the gallery and watch. Marcus Webb was present. He was seated in the front row, beside Colonel Acaffer and 2 members of his former team who had flown in on their own time. He wore a dark gray suit. He did not wear any of his decorations. He had been asked by Dr. Hayward's staff whether he wanted to make a statement for the record, and he had declined. He said, "Let the evidence make the statement." Brian Caulfield entered the courtroom in a dark suit that fit him poorly. He had lost weight in the months since the stop. He sat at the defense table and did not look at the gallery. Prosecution's opening argument was delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Renata Ose, who had been with the Civil Rights Division for 11 years. She did not raise her voice. She did not use theatrical language. She laid out a sequence of events with the flat, careful precision of a person who knows that the facts presented clearly are sufficient. On a Tuesday morning in June, Osai said, a man drove to the hardware store to buy concrete mix for his mother's garden. He was not speeding. He had committed no violation. He stopped when the lights came on, placed both hands on the wheel, lowered his windows, and identified himself. What happened next was captured on 3 separate recording devices from 3 separate angles and is not in dispute. She paused. What is in dispute is whether Officer Caulfield believed that what he was doing was lawful. The defendant will tell you that he perceived a threat. We will show you exactly what the cameras saw. The video played. The courtroom watched Marcus Webb raise both hands, watched them stay raised, watched Caulfield step back and draw the taser anyway, watched Marcus fall. In the gallery, Gloria Tate sat with her hands in her lap and her jaw set. Deshaun Holloway looked at the floor. Behind them, in the 3rd row, a woman who had never been named in any complaint, who had been stopped on Route 9 2 years ago and had not reported it because she had been afraid, and because she had been told that nothing would happen anyway, sat with her hands folded and her eyes open. The defense's central argument was proportionality and perception. The defense attorney, a federal criminal practitioner named Margaret Holt, who had taken the case knowing what she was walking into, argued methodically that Caulfield had operated within the range of his training, that non-compliance creates legitimate officer safety concerns, and that the federal nexus was a post hoc construction that did not reflect the officer's state of mind at the time of the stop. It was a professionally prepared argument. It ran into 3 problems. The first was Sandra Greer, who took the stand and described, calmly and without embellishment, exactly what she had seen. A man with raised hands, a taser drawn without a verbal warning sufficient to allow compliance, and an officer who, when she showed him the government credential, told her it was probably fake without looking at it again. The second was the prior complaint files, which Morales introduced as pattern evidence under federal civil rights statute. 3 stops, 3 black drivers. Same corridor of Route 9, same officer, 3 closed complaints. Holt objected. The objection was overruled. The third problem was the audio. Caulfield's cruiser dashcam had captured audio throughout the stop, including the 22 seconds between when Caulfield first saw the truck pull off the road and when he stepped out of his vehicle. The audio had been recovered, enhanced, and certified by the FBI's forensic lab. In those 22 seconds, before any interaction had taken place, before Caulfield had any information about the driver beyond what he could see through his windshield, there were 9 words that the lab had isolated from ambient road noise. I played them for the jury. She did not ask Caulfield to explain them. She did not editorialize. She simply played the audio, let the 9 words sit in the air of the courtroom for a moment, and then moved on to her next exhibit. Holt requested an immediate sidebar. The sidebar lasted 14 minutes. When the attorneys returned to their tables, Holt's face had the particular expression of someone who has just been told that the last exit on the highway is behind them. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, a retired schoolteacher from a county 40 miles away who had served on 2 prior federal juries, looked straight ahead when she stood to deliver the verdict. She did not look at Caulfield. She did not look at the defense table. She read the finding on each count in a clear, even voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. Guilty, guilty, guilty on the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law with bodily injury, which carries an enhanced penalty. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Malone, who had been on the federal bench for 14 years and who was known, in the way that federal judges are known, for the care she took with her sentencing remarks. She was brief. She did not lecture. She said that a badge is an instrument of service, not of dominance, and that a finding of this nature, with this level of documentation, left her no latitude to exercise leniency that the record did not support. She sentenced Brian Caulfield to 7 years in a federal correctional institution, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release, and a permanent prohibition from serving in any law enforcement capacity in any jurisdiction. She also noted for the record that the consent decree between the Faro County Sheriff's Department and the Department of Justice had been signed 3 weeks prior, requiring independent oversight of all stops and use of force incidents for a period of 5 years, mandatory retraining, and a civilian complaint review process with external accountability. The gavel came down once. It did not need to come down twice. 3 weeks after the sentencing, on a Friday afternoon in early December, Marcus Webb finished building his mother's raised garden beds. He had bought new bags of concrete mix. The original ones had been sitting in the truck bed for months. His mother, a retired schoolteacher named Edna Webb, stood in the backyard of her house on the edge of Caldwell Creek watching him work, and she did not say much for a long time. She brought him coffee at one point, and he took it, and they stood together in the cold afternoon looking at the 3 finished beds. "You could have gone anywhere," she said eventually. "After everything, you could have gone somewhere they don't know your name." "I know," he said. "Why here?" He looked at the yard, at the bare dirt in the new beds waiting for spring, at the fence his father had built in 1987 that needed 1 new post on the east side, at the back door of the house where he had grown up and learned and left and eventually come back. "Because it's home," he said, "and because things that need fixing don't get fixed by people who leave." His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Those beds are going to be beautiful in April." "Yes," Marcus said, "they are." He picked up the shovel and finished the last corner post, and the coffee cooled in the cup beside him, and the afternoon light fell across the yard, and the town of Caldwell Creek, Georgia, was quiet. Brian Caulfield had believed for 8 years that the badge made him untouchable, that the machinery of institutional protection would absorb whatever came after the stop, that the pattern could continue because it always had. He was right about the pattern. He was wrong about it continuing. Because patterns end when the right person finally gets pulled over. And Marcus Webb, a man who had spent 16 years keeping the country safe in ways that would never be in any newspaper, was on a Tuesday morning in June the right person. Not because of his credentials, not because of who called from Washington, but because he had kept his hands raised, his voice level, and his composure absolute in the face of a man who was counting on him to give in to fear. He didn't. And when the system finally worked the way it was supposed to, slowly, imperfectly, but completely, it was not because power had descended from Washington to rescue him. It was because Marcus Webb had already done what every man and woman like him has always done. He had held the line, and he had waited for the truth to catch up. It always does. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that composure under pressure is the most powerful thing a person can carry, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit the like button and subscribe so you're here the next time justice gets the ending it deserves. The next story is already waiting.